Dr. Emmanuel McCall delivered his first sermon at age 14. His very name means he has come with wisdom. During his years in ministry, he has been called preacher, pastor, scholar, and educator, but he is probably best known for his work in racial reconciliation. In the late 1950s, he became the first African American to enroll in the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. He was also the first African American to work in the Southern Baptist movement, and this was during a time when it was dangerous to do so. While a faculty member at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary from 1970 until 1996, he developed the Black Church Studies program, a program that went on to be taught in other Southern Baptist seminaries. Although he was often criticized publicly by both blacks and whites, he stood his ground, believing that his work was to espouse the idea that God has made us one. His work is international, and he has served around the world, teaching in Ghana, Liberia, Nigeria, and West Africa. Dr. McCall continues to be honored for his work. Dr. McCall is married to Emma Marie McCall. They are the parents of 2 children and 5 grandchildren. AIB presents Spiritual Journey, Dr. Emmanuel McCall.
Our Bible was not given to us in the King James English of 1611, nor even in the language that we speak today, but it was given to us out of the language of that day, Hebrew in the Old Testament, Greek in the New. And those who translated found words which had meanings for them in their day. And if the Scriptures are to come alive for us in our day, we must seek for synonyms to those words which come alive to us. It was Dawn Anderson, a clinical psychologist, who helped me to understand one of the problems that I had with the word blessed, because I had difficulty reconciling blessedness with those poor in spirit, those who were mourning, those who were the meek, those who were persecuted and reviled as they are given in the Beatitudes. He helped me to understand that what Jesus was talking about was a spiritual attitude, and that attitudes can best be described in other languages, and for him the word healthy had meaning instead of the word blessed. And when I began looking at the Beatitudes using the word healthy, then the Beatitudes came alive. There are other synonyms that I had to have translated that were meaningful for me to understand the rest of them. And one of these I lift up today out of the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5, verse 8. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God.
The person who most influenced my life growing up was my adopted grandfather. My dad was originally from Charles, South Carolina, and at age 14 he was working in a sawmill. And some guys decided to have fun at his expense, and he picked up a club to defend himself. Well, the word was out that they would get him that night. The guest preacher who was there for a revival heard about it, and he put my dad in the trunk of his car and went back to Pennsylvania and then adopted my dad, raised him. So this is the man who influenced me probably more than anyone else in my early years. He also had the privilege of naming me when I was born. He was very biblical. And in the Old Testament, children were presented for blessing on the 8th day. And so I was presented for blessing. My dad gave him the privilege of naming me. There were 8 people in the room, and he made them all pledge that they would not tell what happened in that room until it was time. The thing that he wanted secret was that he predicted that I would preach. And so he named me Emmanuel, God with us, Lemuel, wisdom after King Solomon. And I did not understand that preaching aspect until age 14. I really didn't want to go into ministry. because I saw what happened to my grandfather, my adopted grandfather. That at that time, the little church had an annual call. At the end of the year, the last Sunday of the year, the pastor and his wife would be dismissed, and the church would take a vote. Do we want him back next year? Yes or no? Well, there came a time they said no. And so he left and went to the adjoining town where he started another church. But he was my influence up at least through about age 9. Earlier than that, at age 8, when I saw the way that he was treated as a pastor, I had an awareness of, the ministry is something that I felt, even at age 8, I felt an inclination to. But the gossip and the way he was treated, and of course I was prejudiced because this is my adopted grandfather whom I loved. I was sure I did not want to have that as my experience. But at age 14, I couldn't resist what was an inward compulsion. And I finally ended up telling Pastor Waller what I was feeling, and he took it from there. On the 5th Sunday of November, 1950, I did my initial sermon. But on the Sunday that I did that initial sermon, Reverend Delane was there, and he had the 8 people who were still living to stand, and indicated that he had predicted that I would preach. They were not to tell me, so as not to influence what God might do later. And so he had the privilege of naming me, and I've tried to live up to the sense of call and prophecy since then.
I've been influenced, as I'm sure many of you have, by what you have seen in motion picture, what you have seen in artistic presentations, that Jesus had just a vast throng of folk, and that was to whom the Sermon on the Mount was delivered. But if you look closely at verse 1 of chapter 5, you discover that Jesus got away from the crowds. The crowds had come for other reasons. They had come for healings. They had come to see miracles. They wanted to see a spectacle. They came for a show. They came out of curiosity. But Jesus would not entrust something so sacred to those whose minds and hearts had not been conditioned.
When I was at Southern Seminary as a student, in the Baptist history textbook and in the class, there was nothing that talked about Black Baptist. And I complained to my professor. He said, well, to be honest with you, Emmanuel, nobody's writing it. And let's see if we can find some resources for you to begin researching. And let's make that one of your class projects. And so I accepted the challenge, and I happened to have a side job working for the American Baptist, which was a black religious paper. And I was put in contact with people who might have some awareness of Black Baptist history. Because it was true, we were not writing in those days. The project that I turned in so interested the professor that in subsequent years, when I was in Louisville, when he got to that, he put a part in his syllabi for me to come for 2 days and lecture on Black Baptist history. And that really whet my appetite for the understanding of Black Baptist history, which was not written well. I did begin discovering then a few books of men who had written, and about that time more were beginning to write. And so that was what absorbed my attention. And later, after I had come to the Home Mission Board, the same professor at Southern asked me if I would come back each semester and lecture in his Baptist history courses. And so I did that until 1969. And on that visit, I also lectured in the ethics class on race. And both of those professors took me to lunch, and they had an idea. Why don't we start a Black Church Studies program here at Southern? And so Mac, which was the name they called me, would you work on pulling a syllabus together? Sure. So I did, had one to them in a couple of weeks. They presented to the faculty. There was just a little bit of hesitancy because the administration and most of the faculty thought it was directed toward black students. Well, of a campus of about 1,800 students, there were only 3 of us. And so they couldn't see putting in that program for those 3 students. Those 2 professors convinced the rest of the faculty and the administration that the class was really for the Anglo pastors that were there. And sure enough, it turned out to be a very successful venture. I had as many as 80 students in the first class. But the model that we developed in Louisville was picked up by the other 5 Southern Baptist seminaries. In fact, I was invited to first meet with the presidents in their annual meeting and explained what we were doing in Louisville, and it excited them, and so all of their schools picked up on the program. It was one of the earliest, and the people that we brought were people who were actively involved in the community life. These were pastors, these were activists. They did not come to talk civil rights, they came to talk about the black church. You can't talk about the black church without talking about civil rights and the uplift of the race and the struggles for justice and all of that. I did that from 1970 until 1996. And by 1996, the administration of the seminary had changed. A different group of people were in leadership, and that ended my tenure there. But the same year, McAfee School of Theology developed, and some of the people who were on McAfee's faculty were colleagues of mine at Louisville, and we had been friends for all the years, and I was invited to join McAfee. So I have served with McAfee since 1996 as an adjunct, in addition to my pastoring.
The truth is, God has not told us on our own to be perfect. Now, follow me pretty closely here because I'm going to say something that's laden. Jesus did not tell us to be without flaw, without sin. That would be asking us to contradict what is a part of who we are.
In 1962, which was the year I completed my first degree, the Bachelor of Divinity degree, one evening in January, I was coming out of the library, and Dr. John Claypool, who was pastor of Crescent Hill Baptist Church and an adjunct faculty at Southern Seminary, we were both leaving the building at the same time. And in 1962, there was turmoil all over the nation, but particularly in the South, over school integration. Cities were rioting, there was all kind of confusion, torn up. And John pulled me aside and said, "Mac, let's go over to the student union building and get a cup of coffee. I need to talk to you." In that coffee break, or coffee time we had together, he shared with me his idea that if we could ever get the Baptists together, Louisville would be solid as far as peace. We could pull off peaceful transition. So we began talking about how do we do it? And we agreed that if he got 6 whites, I got 6 blacks. These were pastors. And we spent time getting to know each other, to understand each other's history, each other's personality, and then do some kind of assessment of the Louisville community, and then see if we could come up with something that we could present to the Baptists of Louisville. So he got 6, I got 6. We met privately together. We didn't tell anybody we were doing this. We met at homes. We met at a couple of the churches. But every Tuesday, we covenanted that every Tuesday was for this group alone. And between January or February when we started and April, we had become a solid group. We were a fellowship. We had discovered some things about each other, about race, about reconciliation, that we felt like we needed to share. In those days, all of the clergy had a Monday morning meeting. We met different places. The whites met at Baptist Hospital. The blacks, Baptists, met at West Chestnut Street Church. So the 6 of us in each category went to our ministers' conference, told them what we had been doing, and asked if they would be willing to give one meeting a month. And let's try seeing if we could come together and avoid the problems that other cities were having in Louisville. Both conferences agreed to do it, and as a result, we formed what was called the Louisville Baptist Pastors Conference. And that organization, which was made up of close to about 800 clergy persons, now that included pastors, ministerial staffs, other ministers that were in the churches, they became very much interested in it, and we began doing such things as pulpit exchanges, congregational exchanges. Deacons groups would get together, the mission groups would get together, youth groups would get together, and for the next 6 years, it was that Louisville Baptist Pastors Conference that really saw to it that we had no riotous situations, open housing, open facilities. All of these became a smooth transition for all of us, and Louisville avoided the problems that others had. Well, one of the persons at Southern Seminary was Hugo Culpepper. He was missions professor. I'd had 3 different missions classes with him. He was asked to come to Atlanta to direct the Division of Home Missions for the Southern Baptist Home Mission Board. It was about 1967 when the Home Mission Board decided they needed a black person on staff to help with the Ministry of Racial Reconciliation. And they approached a couple of people. The people they approached wanted nothing to do with it. And then my name was presented. Dr. Culpepper presented my name. And the name Culpepper may be familiar to you because this was Alan Culpepper's father. I had felt a sense of call for interracial ministry based on the 6-year experience working in the Louisville setting. And so I agreed to come, and for the next 23 years, I gave leadership to a program of racial reconciliation.
We came from the earth. We are dusty. We are creatures of the dust. We are creatures of flesh. And to strive to be without flaw, without sin, is something that you and I cannot achieve. It is not in us to achieve it. And God would not be so cruel. He would not be so mean as to tell us to do what we cannot do.
I got pushback from all directions. We had the African Americans, the black community, that were pushing back. Some of them had bad memories. They wanted nothing to do with that. They felt like I had betrayed them, that I was an Uncle Tom, that instead of being focused only in something from the black community, here I was over here. One of the cracks that they would make was in Pharaoh's palace. And then there were those who were white who did not want the Home Mission Board and Southern Baptist moving in this direction. And so, yeah, we caught it from all sides. The Lord allowed some things to happen that were only divine origin. For example, in 1972, we had a youth publication that came out of Southern Baptist Sunday School Board. They had the picture of a black young man and 3 white young ladies on a college portico sufficient distance between them so nobody could say any romantic things was going on. But